Nuclear power. The implementation of nuclear power in the Philippines is mothballed since 1986, and its survival is subject to much debate. For a country not much blessed with cheap and available energy resource, as typical island our country do, is nuclear power really a good and viable option for us? How much does Philippines consume energy? The consumption of energy in the Philippines has been increasingly constantly by 6.4% between 2008 to 2018, from 60,831 gigawatts per hour to 99,765 gigawatts per hour in 2018. From residential area in 2008, the consumption is around 16,664 gigawatts per hour to 28,261. That is a 6.9% increase for the span of 10 years. For commercial areas, it has increased by 6.9% from 14,136 gigawatts per hour and reaching up to 24,016 gigawatts per hour in 2018. In the industrial side, with 17,031 gigawatts per hour, up to 27,587 gigawatts per hour, with a growth of around 6.2% for the last 10 years. The total consumption here in the Philippines is around 99,765 gigawatts per hour, with the main resource used for consumption of energy in the Philippines is coal, which covers around 52.05%, producing over 51,932 gigawatts per hour. The next is renewable energy such as geothermal, wind, hydro, and solar energy, which covers 23.68%, producing 23,326 gigawatts per hour. Natural gas, with a total of 21.38%, producing 21,234 gigawatts per hour. And finally is oil-based products such as diesel and gasoline, which only covers 3.18%, producing only 3,173 gigawatts per hour in 2018. The supply for the energy in the country is just sufficient for its average demand. It gets worse when the demand is at its peak. During the hot days of dry season, for example, rational blackout and very high cost of electricity are the consequences of thinning power supply. In fact, we are still the highest in ASEAN members in terms of electricity cost. But did you know that there is another energy source that we never used or was abandoned, and that is nuclear energy? The Bataan nuclear power plant is the only nuclear power plant in the Philippines. It was completed in 1985, which cost around 2 billion pesos. That is like it was built by the former dictator Ferdinand Marcos during 1985. But sadly, up to this day, this nuclear power plant has not created not a single watt of energy, because due to the fact that Marcos was overthrown and the Chernobyl incident has spread throughout the world and everyone was scared if we might suffer the same fate as them. Today, millions of dollars, not pesos, dollars, alright, are being spent just to maintain its facility, and it's said it will take billions of pesos to keep it up and running. The head of the Nuclear Core Group of National Power Corporation, Mauro Marcelo, believes that the nuclear power is the best way to get electricity, which is also clean and cheap. Recent reports have been spreading about the prospect plan of the government to rehabilitate the Bataan nuclear power plant. The power plant is said to supply 10% of the northern Philippines' electricity demands. It is claimed that the power plant we have is much more safer than Fukushima's power plant in Japan. For now, it remains dormant as a remnant during the Marcos' time in his dictatorship, but maybe in few years, the power plant can work operationally and the electricity produced will only consume 2 cents per kilowatt hour. For now, the government feels like it's a good idea to put the atomic energy in the mix, but the government has few other issues to deal with before proceeding with this plan.
If so implemented, what will be the benefits to our country? Low pollution, negligible amounts of carbon dioxide. As a matter of fact, the core of BNPP contains about 60 tons of nuclear fuel. A third of this is replaced every 18 months. 20 tons new goes in and 20 tons old go out. What goes in looks exactly like what goes out. It is not like a piece of wood that when burned becomes charcoal or ash. There is no outward dirt or residue produced. called SNF, which is not really spent but only partly used. In cost. The bulk of cost of its price comes from its construction. Once operational, the fuel is cheaper in the long run, unlike the conventional thermal power plants. For example, BNPP requires 20 tons, including the cladding of fuel, costing $20 million, but it is refueled once every 18 months. In contrast, a coal-fired power plant with the same output for 18 months requires 2.55 million tons of coal, costing $102 million, a clear $82 million savings that can be used for other services. Base load production. Like the coal-fired power plants, it can provide a stable and economical production of electricity at longer periods of time. This can work synergistic with other sources of energy such as wind, water, geothermal, and solar when the demand is too high. The electricity production of nuclear power plants can be lowered if other sources of energy is favorable and economical to utilize. Foreign exchange savings. Operating BMPP will save foreign exchange, recognized as our scarcest resource. By lowering the number of times we buy foreign fuels, we lessen the impact of the volatility of the forex and we lessen the reliance in coal and natural gas. Atom. Therefore, the amount of fuel required in a nuclear power plant is much smaller compared to those of other types of power plants. Low pollution. Negligible amounts of carbon dioxide. As a matter of fact, the core of BNPP contains about 60 tons of nuclear fuel. A third of this is replaced every 18 months. 20 tons new goes in and 20 tons old go out. What goes in looks exactly like what goes out. It is not like a piece of wood that when burned becomes charcoal or ash. There is no outward dirt or residue produced, called SNF, which is not really spent but only partly used. Batch of SNF will yield 50 new batches. That's 900 months or 75 years worth. Why is the rehabilitation of Bataan nuclear power plant a big debated issue amongst government officials? What is nuclear energy anyway? The big idea behind nuclear power is that there are these nuclei, which are unstable. A really good one is uranium, and particularly a flavor of uranium called negative 235. It has 235 protons and neutrons, and its nucleus is massive. It is one of the biggest in existence on Earth. If you add a neutron, the nucleus rips itself into two in a process we call fission. Some of its mass is converted to energy. The released energy is used to make steam, which turns a turbine, which spins a generator, which makes electrical energy. A tiny pellet of uranium, the size of an eraser on the end of a pencil, is equal to the amount of energy we get from a whole train car worth of coal. So it is incredibly energy dense. So if we could produce that much energy, why was the Bataan nuclear power plant not operated? In fact, in the global scale, only about 10% of the world's energy comes from the nuclear power plants, and that is actually down from a peak of 18%. Why do people not like the idea of nuclear power anymore? Nuclear accidents. Nuclear accidents happen because of the technological and human lapses, as any other technologies does, including other sources of energy. We are lucky to have those accidents as we can observe its consequence. Nuclear wastes. Nuclear waste is very dangerous and long-persisting material. Its storage is subject to much scrutiny. Nuclear weapons proliferation. Spent nuclear waste can be converted to fissile material of nuclear weapons. Moreover, the non-fissile radioactive waste can be used as radiological weapons. But is it really dangerous? According to experts, nuclear power itself, when it runs well, is actually very safe. Power releases less radiation into the environment than any other major energy sources. There's actually very little radiation that comes away from a nuclear plant. In fact, you're exposed to less radiation living near a nuclear power plant than when you are living near a coal plant. That's because when you burn coal, there are some radioactive atoms in that coal, and they get releases in their atmosphere. In 2013, a study conducted by NASA found that nuclear energy has prevented around 1.8 million deaths, even if you include the death tolls from Chernobyl and Fukushima nuclear energy ranks last in death per energy unit produced disregarding renewable energies. While nuclear waste is really toxic, it's usually stored somewhere, while the toxic byproducts of fossil fuels are pumped into the air we breathe. If we can choose between lots of dangerous stuff put into a deep hole and lots of dangerous stuff being pumped into the atmosphere, the former seems more logical. In a 2014 study by the Clean Air Task, 7,500 deaths a year in the US has been attributed to fine particle pollution from coal plants, and that's when it's working properly. Yeah, it is true. Many people have died as a result of radiation from nuclear power plants, but the number is much smaller than coal, and it only happens when something goes wrong. Single catastrophic events burn into our memory, while coal and oil kill silently, which is why we tend to assume that nuclear is a lot more dangerous when it's actually not. For as long as we continue using fossil fuels, nuclear energy will save way more lives. And nuclear power plants do not give off carbon dioxide, so they don't contribute to climate change at all. If fossil fuels become obsolete, there will be a great reduction in the emission of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This may be the solution to the global problem of climate change. So nuclear power is way more environment friendly than fossil fuels. Nuclear power plants operate at much higher capacity factors than renewable energy resources or fossil fuels. Capacity factor is a measure of what percentage of the time a power plant actually produces energy. It is a problem for all intermittent energy resources. The sun does not always shine, nor the wind always blow, nor water always fall through the turbines of a dam. The Philippines, for instance, has experienced unreliable energy production in the past. These incidents cause increase in the generation cost of power and thus increasing our electric bills. In fact, Philippine power rates, which are not state subsidized, were ranked the 16th most expensive out of 44 countries surveyed in a 2016 study commissioned by Meralco. The question of where to get a stable source of electrical energy come to place. Nuclear is the cheapest power source, and the cost can stay the same for the next 50 to 100 years. By tapping nuclear, where upfront investments is high but fuel costs are lower, electricity costs today, which were built 40 to 50 years age. The Bataan nuclear power plant is generally younger. It is in fact younger than 60% of all existing nuclear power plants in the world. It is 100% complete, and with good rehabilitation, we can now have our first nuclear-generated electrical energy. A question we leave you is, so, should we use nuclear energy?